Um, First thing we'll do is call for public comment on items that are on the agenda tonight. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, our planning commission hearing. And the first item we have is a review for conditional use 0704. And Laura, can you give us the staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Stein. The applicant is the House of Hope, and they received approval for conditional use in 2007. The conditional use was for a residential boarding school located at 206 Holmes, and it would house 3 to 5 girls between the ages of 13 and 17. As a condition of approval, the Planning Commission required the use to come back to the Planning Commission once a year for the 3 years after the use began. As you read in your packet, the use began in 2008, and this is the first time they've come back before the Planning Commission. So additional review will be required next year and the year after as well. Notice of this was sent to the Neighborhood Association and those standing in the original conditional use, and the purpose of this review is to see if the use still complies with the criteria in Chapter 1756, our conditional use criteria. If there are any flags that it may not, or you want to add any conditions of approval or anything like that, then we'll have to have an additional Type 2 or Type 3 review after this. So this is just preliminary review. Does everything look like it's still complying? How has it changed since 2008? So we did receive one public comment on this application, and they expressed 2 concerns. The first concern was about traffic. So on site, they have meetings about once a month or open houses to get people onto the site and walk through the site. Staff believes that those open houses could be similar in nature to, say, a dinner party you would be having in a residential use. So the traffic associated with those open houses would be typical for the rest of the zoning designation. The second area of concern that was raised was the use of the site. The property had stopped being used as a residential boarding school in March, and the property owner is unsure if they would like to continue with the boarding school use, or if they would like to have 5 foster children and become a foster home. If they become a foster home, we no longer need a conditional use that's outright permitted. At this point, since we don't really know where the use of the site is going, staff recommends waiting till our review in 1 year from now to see how the use of the site has changed, since right now it's kind of in between. Other than that, the use has been doing what they said that they would be doing. The traffic and all the open houses are kind of expected with the school. So to the city, it seems typical, and there's no need for further review at this point. We do have someone in the audience that would like to speak as well.
Okay, Ms. Richter, I didn't read the quasi-judicial hearing script. We need to read the script prior to hearing testimony for review. Okay, let me read that then. The following is to be read at the opening of the quasi-judicial public hearing. The review for CU 0704 on land use application is scheduled tonight. The staff report prepared in each application has been made available to the public 7 days before the public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. The staff analyzed the criteria which were contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and Oregon City Municipal Code. Hearing procedure steps is shown on the chart over to my right. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which the card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply, in addition to those in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria. and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed on the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they're not given to city staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing to continue to present additional evidence and testimony, or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence, must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now we'll open the record. Can you do that retroactively? We'll open record retroactively for file number 0704, the review of that file. Does any commissioner have any ex parte conflict of interest, bias, or other statement to declare?
Nope.
No. Has any commissioner visited the site?
Yes.
And if you visited the site, what did you perceive?
What did I perceive? I had read the report, and then I went to the neighborhood, drove around the neighborhood, looked at the particular site.
Okay. Anybody else visit the site? Okay.
And by that, gone down Holmes Lane, several, very familiar with the roadway and the site.
I drive down that street frequently, but I've not paid attention to this address.
Okay, I've been to the site as well, and it looks like part of the neighborhood. So all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 commissioners have visited the site.
Does anyone in the audience wish to question the planning commission on those perceptions?
Okay, so hearing no questions, I'm sorry, Mr. Captain. Okay. We're now ready to have the applicant make the presentation.
The applicant's not here this evening,
Okay.
but we do have that one comment.
We do have one comment.
Yes.
So we'll ask for.
Can I ask staff a question before you
Please.
call the thing? So Laura, they were unable to come tonight? That was the situation? Or you received no comment from them or response from them that they were supposed to be here?
I received no indication that they were not coming.
I see.
You've been in contact with the applicant quite often, so as to why they're not here, we don't know.
I saw the applicant's letters in the file. So.
Is it okay to ask a further question? I just had a question about, in your staff report, there was some information that was submitted, and I presume when the applicant was talking about the community, they were talking about the greater Portland metropolitan area, because it was mentioned many times throughout the report that they were serving the community, and I wasn't really sure what that community was, so I made that assumption.
That would have been in the original
Right, in the
conditional
original,
use.
right. Mm-hmm.
Right. My assumption is that because the girls are from all over the community, but that's just an assumption.
Well, that was kind of my assumption as well.
Yeah.
You made the comment in your opening staff report that this was like a preliminary hearing. Is it possible that they weren't expecting action from this one, that's why they're not here? Or would this, if we make a decision here, it could end, like we can continue the conditional use and we're done? Or is there like another meeting gonna occur scheduled to occur, or will we possibly create a meeting?
It's up to you. If you think that the conditional use is compliant with the original application, still meets the criteria of conditional use in Chapter 1756, then you would just move on from today, and then they'd come back in a year, and we'd reassess again then, and then we'd reassess again the following year. If there are any red flags and you want to look into it further, then we would open up a new Type 2 or Type 3 process. So we would give full notice to all parties.
And then when you said you noticed parties that were part of the original application, I noticed that there was several individuals and or families mentioned in the original conditional use. They got specific notice beyond the 300 feet. That they got a specific letter themselves?
Right, so in the condition of approval of the original one, it specified that the notice for this activity would go to the neighborhood association and all those withstanding in the original conditional use, so it went to everyone that commented,
Right.
that we had to address of, so,
Okay. Did we get anything from Rivercrest?
no,
Okay. Do we know if they've had a meeting?
I don't.
Okay.
I thought I saw something in there about them not having any objections to this.
That was
That was the
before.
original.
That was before. That was not, that was then, not now. I guess that's the way you say it.
Yeah, we've only received one comment.
And has there been any changes in the use?
Well, right now, it's an interim period and we're not really sure how the use will proceed. So we recommend kind of waiting that year, so if they find the funding to go back to that boarding school, they can. And if there's any sort of reason why they're out of compliance with the conditional use at any point in time, we always have code enforcement issues and all these sorts of things that we can deal with separately.
And then if the use was denied this evening, they could turn around and occupy the home with foster care children per state law, is that correct?
Same as a single family home.
All right, so we have a choice.
We have a choice. It sounds as though they just lost funding, so they're not really sure how to move forward. And since everything is so recent.
Okay, I have Linda Lord on the comment form.
Copies? Okay. We can enter this into the record as Exhibit 2. The letter you received on the dice would be Exhibit 1.
Good evening, my name is Linda Lord, I live at 142 home.
You just need to say your name.
Okay, Linda Lord. I submitted testimony the first time around, and I live next door to the subject property. In my earlier testimony, I said that I didn't believe the property fit the criteria under state law for a residential boarding school. I worked quite closely with the people from DHS who shepherded or had authority over the licensing process, and am aware that it did not qualify as a residential boarding school, but it was licensed as a residential care facility for children. It continued being operated as a residential boarding school. I bring that to the Planning Commission's attention because I believe the requirements under the conditional use permit were that it had to follow through with getting licensing from the state as a residential boarding school. I have submitted with my letter prior to tonight copy of the DHS. I have a complete packet of that application. And the front page of it shows a line through the line on the application where they had included submitting the application for a residential boarding school. According to Tom, I believe his last name was Vanderveen. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. He was the person who handled the on-site inspection and the was in charge of whether or not the license got granted. What he told me was when he did the inspection of the facility, he was going to deny the license because the facility does not meet the requirements under the law for boarding school, but they have lesser requirements for a residential care facility. And the folks of House of Hope said, okay, we'll reduce our license to one for a residential care facility, and he allowed them to do that and gave them a license for a residential care facility. I expressed my concern about that, and he said, well, if you have any proof that they're actually doing teaching on site, give me a call and I'll come in and close them down. I didn't have any actual proof of on-site teaching. And when I asked Rita about it, she gave me, never mind what she said, but because I don't want to get into he said, she said, but may I say I didn't have any eyes-on activity that I could move on. I'm bringing this up to you now because I also just gave you from the application packet a second sheet from the fire inspection. Again, it shows that the fire inspector was only inspecting a residential care facility, not a residential boarding school. Again, I raise that only because doing due diligence, I think it might raise a red flag that you would like to have someone call DHS and make sure that they have had all these years indeed a license for a residential boarding school and are complying with state law before you give them a continuation of a city license or permit for a residential boarding school. I care a lot for Rita. She's an adorable person with a great heart. I also share her concern for troubled children. I think we all do, or at least I know we all should. And I also share the state's concern that the facility should be equal to the task, and this one is not. I also have a personal concern that the facility should be appropriate for my next door neighbor, and it is not. I'm going to continue my efforts to have it either be appropriate or be moved.
Can I ask you to finish up, please?
I'm
We're at
doing
the
that now. That
Thank
was my summary statement,
Thank you.
saying please do your best to make that so. I appreciate your time, and especially, not just on this effort, but being a planning commissioner, you do a great service to the city. I don't know how you do it, but bless your hearts.
Thank you very much.
Before you leave, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned in your letter to us that one of the not so good neighbor concerns, you said you weren't sure that it was some pruning that they done. Is there other than the frequent visits, during the open houses, that they're not being good neighbors to you, or, I mean,
Well, I think the big sign on the wall, I think we have some weed issues that we're working on. There's the big groups that come to the property. It's a public facility. There are a lot of people coming for group activities, and I'm used to having small families in that house. A small family, 5 people with, 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 folks coming in, instead of 4 people and 40 people coming in. It's a lot different when 40 people visit than when 8 or 10 relatives come. And when that happens, lots of times, it's living next to a group facility instead of living next to a single family. It's not a single family residence.
okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
And the applicant has arrived and wishes to speak as well.
Hi, my name is Rita Kazenza. I'm the director of House of Portland. And we opened with one resident in June of 2008. Since that time, we've had a maximum of 3 residents, only for a few months at a time. Mainly it's been 1 or 2 residents. We've had, I think, 3 or 4 open houses where we've had, one was a tea where just a limited number of people were invited, and then the others were when we first started. A couple was before we had residents, and then there was 1 or 2 after. We had wanted to do monthly, but that just didn't pan out. We only had 1 or 2, and we've only had 4 board members, board meetings there, which there were only 4 board members, so that was a minimal number of people. We have had work parties come and help to clean up the yard, take out the blackberries that were a nuisance to the neighbors, and do landscaping kinds of things. And those have happened, I think, 4 different times where we've had workers come in, and they've all been from the church that I attend. We are kind of in a transition period right now. We're not sure what direction we're going to go. Right now we don't have any residents. We may choose to do foster care. I've consulted my board. One board member wants to pursue the House of Hope plan, and the other one is leaning towards the foster care setup. So right now, until we can make that determination, and from our national board, we've been given till September to decide which way we're going to go. And until we make that determination, what I would like from the Planning Commission is to maybe do an extension of the conditional use permit. And if we decide to dissolve the House of Hope, of course, then the conditional use would go away. But extended until maybe October, until we decide which direction we're going with that.
Questions from the commissioners?
Did you say that there are currently no residents?
We have no residents right now.
So what activities are ongoing at this time?
We are planning, we do have an annual rummage sale, and we're planning that for the second weekend in June. So that's the only thing that we have planned as an event, or, you know, next Sunday, the 15th, I do have some people coming over. We're going to put in some raised bed for gardening in the backyard, and so we'll have some people come over and help me get those set up.
So who's living there?
I am.
Just you?
Yes.
Okay, and then you said you were in a little bit of a transition, and your original CUP request is a request for an approval to operate as a residential boarding school for 35 girls.
Right.
What's the function of the facility now? Is it operating as a boarding school now?
Not at this point. We are, as House of Hope, because we are an affiliate of a national organization, and we are on inactive status at this point right now until September.
Okay.
And so from now until September, we have to make the decision whether we're going to reopen as House of Hope and a boarding, as a boarding school, residential boarding school, or whether we're going to abandon that program and be strictly foster care.
So between now and September, you'll have no juvenile residents there.
Not as a boarding school, not as House of Hope. You may make that determination before September, but we have until September to make that determination of which direction we're going to go. We may make that decision earlier than September, but because of the cost and the process and everything of getting a conditional use permit at this date right now, we didn't want to relinquish that until we had a clearer vision of which direction we were going to go.
So what I'm hearing from you then is that there isn't any kind of boarding school occurring at the facility?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And that won't occur until, you won't consider the use as a boarding school until September, is that correct?
Well, it's sometime between now and September, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
Yes, hi. I guess I have lots of questions. Number one, why did you not get a good neighbor agreement with the neighborhood association when you had the opportunity to? And I can tell you from someone who has done one with a religious institution that it really wasn't all that difficult.
We did. We sent a good neighbor agreement to the neighborhood association. It was a form, a letter that we sent to the neighborhood association indicating what our plans were and who the contact people were, and if they had a question or a concern, who to contact.
Mm-hmm. And did they agree to that good neighbor agreement and countersign it?
We never heard anything back from them.
Did you make any effort to get back in touch with them? And did you also show that good neighbor agreement to your neighbors? Because what I'm sensing here is, the staff report said that there wasn't one. So that's why I was curious. Did you give a copy of it to the staff so they were aware of that?
And it may be a misunderstanding on our part, but what we were told to do was to, as a good neighbor agreement or letter, was to send this letter to the neighborhood association with what we were doing and who to contact if they had any concerns or any questions or if there was any complaint. It wasn't something that we were told we had to have signed and returned.
It's probably just a good idea. That way you have agreement that, yes, I acknowledge I received this. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, I'm just saying that's been my experience in the city of Portland, that's been my experience here in Oregon City. Because honestly, I'm kind of at a loss to, as to why we don't have that. It would have been nice to see it in the packet. I guess what I have concerns about is that I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that your organization has the greatest intent and desire to do really great things and to help children and do all this. But you have to understand, too, that you're doing it within the setting of a single-family residential neighborhood, And with that, obviously, comes some responsibilities. I would have to say that I would be concerned if my neighbor was holding a giant rummage sale every year, even though my neighborhood has. Matter of fact, after the meeting, if you're interested, we have a big giant neighborhood garage sale that some other neighborhoods besides the one that we're in right now has, and everybody does it on that particular day. It's in August, and it's kind of expected. It's sort of everybody running amok in town, going to all these rummage sales and garage sales. But I think that, you know, something like that that draws a lot of people, and Holmes Lane is not super improved. There's, you know, could be some issues with that. I guess I'm just concerned that maybe the conditional use permit wasn't taken as seriously as it maybe should have, and that's the city is saying that we will allow you to be there, but here are the things that you are required to do as part of those conditions. And, you know, it says all parking will be on site, so, okay, if you have a big giant rummage sale, I'm sure they're not going to be able to park on site. And I'm not saying you can't have them, but, you know, you got a lot of other people around you that can be affected by that type of thing happening on a fairly routine and a regular basis.
Yeah, just once a year. Yeah. But I know people who have rummage sales once a year that are single-family people who just do this.
Oh, yeah, we do that every year in Oregon City, in the first, second weekend in August.
So I didn't feel that was that we were doing anything against our conditional use permit by having a rummage sale. In fact, I called the city about having a rummage sale and asked if there were any permits or anything that we had to do to have a rummage sale, and I was told no, that there was anything.
If it's kind of a giant one, you know, it's one of those things where you might just want to go talk to your neighbors and say, guess what, we're going to have this, FYI. But I guess I'll just end it at that. There's just sort of there's a lot of stuff here I'm trying to read between the lines, and I'm not sure if I'm reading between the right lines.
Well, because I live at the house, I sometimes have personal things that I conduct as a person there. I have a small group Bible study that I had for a period of time come on Friday evenings. There were about 6 women who came to the house on Friday evenings, but that didn't have anything to do with House of Hope. That was a personal Bible study that I was involved in, and they were friends of mine that came to the house. Now, is that I wasn't violating anything in doing that, was I? Okay, I think so. And I had a reception for a friend who was moving, and there were several people that came on a Sunday afternoon. Again, it didn't have anything to do with House of Hope. It was a personal friend who was moving, and we had a going away party for her. I am a social person, and I have had social events there that were separate and apart from any House of Hope activities. In fact, our House of Hope activities have been very minimal.
So it's just hard to, people just don't know that. They know.
I understand that.
So it's,
And, you know, I was just commenting that that's probably a distinction your neighbors can't make. That your neighbors probably have no idea whether it has anything to do with your personal activities or the House of Hope, because it's kind of all under the umbrella of that same location. I guess the one question I would have for you before I forget is, it seems curious to me that the occupancy of the facility started in June 2008 with the condition that within 1 year that the conditional use would be reviewed every 3 years.
I agree.
And so we're 4 years down the line and not just seeing that.
I contacted the city a couple of times about it, and the first time being at about 2.5 years, and said, we were supposed to have a review. I have never been notified of one. And that's when the city said, oh, you were supposed to contact us and schedule a review. And it was our understanding that the city would make the schedule, put it on the schedule, and that we would come and respond to it. That was a misunderstanding that we had. And I think it was sometime mid-summer that we've been trying to get this scheduled for review, and it's just now been able to be on your calendar. Yeah. And oversight again, I didn't, yeah.
That's part of the Good Neighbor Agreement as well. And so if the Good Neighbor Agreement didn't happen within that first 9 months, then it was no longer a requirement.
90 days.
I think it should have stayed in there, but, you know, that's just me.
About how many people do you have at your open house, and how long, what are the hours that you have?
It's usually been, you know, a time period from like 10 to 1, and we've had, at the maximum, we've had maybe 20 people that came during that time period.
This is during daylight hours?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Commissioner Mabry?
Why a boarding school and not, I mean, was there going to be an educational component that,
There is an educational component to the House of Hope program. The girls are schooled on site. And that's our 501c3. When we presented it to the IRS, we presented it as a charitable organization. When they saw what our program was, they said, no, you're not a charitable organization, you're a boarding school. And so the IRS, their determination and the way they classified us was as a boarding school because we did on-site schooling. When we went to the state and said, okay, what do we have to do to be a boarding school? The superintendent of education, the education department said, there's really not anything. All you have to do is notify the local superintendent of schools that you're there, and which we did. They said for the boarding part, you have to go to the Department of Human Services. When we went to the Department of Human Services, they considered us a residential care facility. So that's where the two, I mean, it's always been kind of a mesh of two different organizations, you know.
Is that because
entities.
EHS doesn't do education and
Yeah.
education doesn't do?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So we've always kind of been in between. So
do you have a copy, did you send a letter to the superintendent, or how did you inform them of your
I
engagement?
sent them a letter.
Okay. I think irrespective of how this comes out, we probably should have that on file to show that there's been some communication, because one of your conditions was, did you get a boarding school conditional use permit? And so showing that there's been communications with at least the school district while we're trying to figure out, you know, well, I mean, I guess that's the question for staff is, what are the conditional use requirements for a boarding school? I mean, is there a specific, you have to follow these rules, or is there a zoning, or is there, I mean.
If you can find one, I'd be glad to see, because I couldn't find one. Yeah, I could not find
You're the deer in the headlights.
anything. So really the condition, I mean, because we're considered a boarding school, that's what the conditional use was set up as. But really, in all the aspects of it, it was really the residential care facility that they kind of went by the guidelines of residential care facility in doing the conditional use permit, because there really isn't anything there for a boarding school that we could find.
As an educator, I can understand that, and that 90% of what's happening is the house safe, is it clean, and all that. I mean, homeschoolers just sit around the kitchen table with a book open and you know, magnets on the refrigerator, and that meets homeschool requirements.
Right.
So I'm not sure how much more you would have to do for that.
The Department of Education couldn't provide anything for me whenever I, you know, several years ago when I went to them and was looking for guidelines of what do we have to do, because like I said, we didn't start off to be a boarding school. The IRS is the one that kind of made that determination for us. And so then we kind of had to go, okay, now what do we do? And I went to the Department of Education, and they were like, well, you don't do that, you know. So, It was more the residential care facility that provided guidelines and requirements and set up the things that we had to adhere to be a residential care facility.
As far as your in facility, schooling, do they attend the local school and then you supplement it there, or is it you're teaching them geography and economics and math and everything in there?
The way that it was set up, and that's part of the reason that we're on inactive status. The way it was set up was that the girls did the schooling on site. And then once a week we went to Canby to the First Baptist Church School, and they received their testing there. And the requirement for that National has imposed is that all of it has to be on site. And we can't accomplish that until sometime in the summer, because in order to do that, I have to go to Tennessee for a week to get the administrator training. And so they don't offer that until June and July, so we couldn't, I mean, you know, that's where we're at. And are we going to go ahead and do that? Are we going to go get the training? Are we going to reopen as a House Hope? We don't know that yet, you know. So really, after all of this time trying to get the schedule, it was scheduled probably at the worst time it could be, because we're in this period of flux and really not knowing which way to go. That's why my request was that we extend it until September, so that we have that opportunity, that time frame to decide which way we're going to go. And then at that time, you know, maybe come back and say, okay, you know, we are going forward with House of Hope. We are going to do fully on-site educational component, and go at it that way, instead of, you know, if we relinquish the conditional use permit at this point, then if we decided to do it the other way, we would have to start all over again, and it's a timely and costly procedure that we would really rather not have to do.
I guess, you know, what we're looking at through the city and through this commission, we're reviewing a proposed land use. We're looking at the impacts, and we have criteria in Chapter 1756 conditional use that we went through with the original conditional use approval. Do we require documentation from the state and IRS as to exactly what they're calling it? No, we don't. You know, we could have certainly put a condition on there that says you'll provide a license from or documentation from the state, but at some point we stop, and the state would take over where they have jurisdiction, or if it were something larger where the federal agency would be involved, the federal agency takes over on that. And the only place I can think of is in the in our natural resource overlay district. You know, if you're doing something in a creek or a stream bed, we do require a DSL permit be submitted to us prior to us releasing the construction. But in this instant, we didn't have a condition or anything in our code that required that type of a documentation.
Yeah, it's just my concern is that, you know, because of that not being covered, that's like saying we granted somebody a conditional use permit to build a gas station, and they built a hotel and they sell 5 gallons of gas a year out of it, so they're a gas station. And if that's not what they are, if that's not what they're doing, then, you know, I mean, that's our bailiwick, is to make sure that what they said they were doing under the conditional use is what's being done, and it's being done appropriately. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, getting into their accreditation isn't relevant, and I understand that, because we're not an accrediting agency. It's up to them to become accredited. But, you know, we need to know, are they just boarding people, or are they schooling them? Because one's a care facility, different criteria, or fostering, for that matter, if they're going off to Canby or Gardner, which is right down the street, that's a different set of conditions. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is, you know, what conditions may or may not apply to this. I mean, offhand, and this might be jumping ahead, I'm willing to, I think waiting until October or so might be a better thing, so we can nail this stuff down.
Tony, I had a question I think it goes to my perception that there's a blurring of the activities between the House of Hope and the personal activities of the director. And I'm just curious, within this residential context, that there's, and I looked at the original conditional use and didn't see any guidelines specifically, other than the parking restrictions, that would limit activities at the facility beyond those that are specifically for the use of the facility.
I agree. There weren't how many open houses a year. We didn't get into that type of detail. And then, you know, it does complicate it when you do have personal activities going on under a conditional use permit, with a site with a conditional use permit. Hours of operation, number of people to visit. We didn't set those parameters. What we said is we've got this school, and through the conditional use process, is this appropriate in this neighborhood? Now, did we identify every potential activity that could go on there? No, we didn't. And I guess I'm at a law. You know, it would be treated through probably the code enforcement aspect, through complaint driven, is what would notify the city if something out of the ordinary was going on the site or was a detriment to the neighborhood.
How would we know?
Well, that's
Without any.
That's what I mean.
Without any guidelines or
be,
criteria.
right?
Yeah.
It would be complaint driven. It would be treated just as if it were a single family house, or in this case, because it is a conditional use, we'd go back to the conditional use permit and see what's in there. But you're right. There's not a whole lot in there to say, you know, A, B, and C is fine, D is not.
Right, because if you look at the tangible things here in the original conditional use, parking is probably the most identifiable. You can count cars. How many people they're allowed to have on visit is hard to.
All parking shall be on site.
In the notice of decision, I don't think they made that.
Recommended conditions of approval.
There are only two conditions of approval on the notice of
Should've been.
decision. One was to come back yearly, and the other one is for the good neighbor agreement.
Which neither have happened.
I guess a question I have is, if I may be so kind as to ask, even though you don't have anybody there right now, what actually is legally licensed to be happening on site? Let's say in the best of all possible worlds.
What it would look like practically.
No, I mean, what do you have a license for right now, as of today, because you were going through some process to get licensed for something, and I'm just not sure whether you're, I guess the question is, are you licensed, do you have a license to either have the boarding school, or
Yes,
you have a license from the state to have a boarding school?
yes.
Whoever it is, yeah.
No, a residential care facility, because the state doesn't license boarding schools.
Okay. No, I'm still really confused. I guess number one, I would have recommended, had I been here at the time, that there be something in there so that whether it's legal, required or not by the code, that the city knows that there is some legal use that's been documented as part of the record. And number two, you know, it is appropriate for a good neighbor agreement to say, okay, if you're having, you know, school or residential care or whatever it is, that there should be some reasonable hours. And all of those sort of things get discussed in good neighbor agreements, even, you know, right down to what kind of signage it is. And it seems to me that those things should have been,
We did meet
you know,
with the neighborhood association, and they had no objection to us being there.
did you meet with your neighbors within 300 feet maybe?
We were told we had to meet with the neighborhood
Right,
association.
but I mean,
And then, yeah,
I'm just kind of going on, you know, I'm not saying that was documented, but to me, it's just sort of common courtesy or common sense that, you know, you've got people around you, you know there's problems, or could be problems, so you do some things to sort of allay people's fears. You kind of say, hey, here we are, come ask me questions, I'm gonna hold a meeting, come and see.
we had open house, we had an open house, and the neighborhood was, you know, welcome to come. They came to the conditional use hearing, and they, you know, voiced their concerns. two of the people that voiced their concerns about us not wanting us to be there, have told me, well, one of them has come to me and said, you know, I really didn't understand what you were doing. They've donated things to our rummage sales. The neighbor directly across the street, who were two teachers, were concerned about the educational component, and they haven't had any concerns about us being there. And we have a great relationship. We haul garbage cans and
I would
things like
document
that.
all that, just for your own,
Okay.
you know, that if you get asked, you can say, yes, you know.
I have a question for staff about good neighbor agreements. So if you're an applicant and you have to fulfill this good neighbor agreement requirement, and you go to the neighborhood association and you present your project and they don't respond, what kind of recourse does the applicant have? I mean, do they go 3 times, and if they don't respond after 3 times, they can have their project, or can the neighborhood association actually hold an applicant hostage by not responding to the requirement for a good neighbor agreement and not say anything?
Well, again, we met with the neighborhood association, and they voted, and they said they had no objection to it.
Right, but there's
And
no
then,
comment to.
then we were told we needed to provide them with a good neighbor policy, is what we were told. It was a good neighbor policy. So we wrote it up and said, you know, this is what we do. This is who to contact. This is, you know, anytime, day or night. If you have concerns, this is who to address your concerns to. And to date, we've never had anyone.
I think my concern is that I think that the neighborhood association should have a limit by which they are to respond to these good neighbor agreements, and then they should.
And that's in here. It says if they don't meet within 90 days, then it's no longer a requirement.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
you know, there should, as of right now, you haven't provided us any information that you've even reached out to them. You've said you have, but
I can provide you.
But I'm just
with
saying,
yeah, a copy
you
of
know,
the letter that was sent.
you know, that should be, you know, some form of documentation should have come to the city, say, have reached out. Again, there's a lot of affirmative actions that you needed to take that you didn't, either, you know, through misunderstandings or whatever. You know, the meeting once a year, with us, the good neighbor agreement with the neighborhood association. So, you know, from that aspect, you know, those, at the very least, I would think if we, well, I'm getting into the after, we still have an open hearing right now, so we need to.
So I guess to respond to Commissioner Esty, we don't have anything codified concerning good neighbor agreements, how they should be created, nor timelines. So we were kind of trying to, you know, look for a compromise, but acknowledging the fact that at some point, if you're going to have non-compliance or non-cooperation, that this commission found that it complies with the land use criteria.
Right.
So that's, you know, without, and the other difficult part is we just don't have the resources to have, you know, like a citizen involvement committee or liaison to kind of act as the mediator, go-between,
Right.
to shepherd these good neighbor agreements. And I'm trying to think, maybe this is the second one that I can.
Yeah, you have the one that I wrote, and,
Right.
you know, I could provide, you know, if I was on the commission, I could have been a resource for them to help put one together, because I researched City of Portland, and I worked with Pete Walter here at the city on putting together a good neighbor agreement with the House of for Ministries, and I think it was a fairly good when Pete reviewed it. We had attorneys review it, everybody looked at it, everybody liked it. You know, we've been in contact, our neighborhood association has been in contact with them, and, you know, things have worked out well. I guess I don't have any more questions, but I have a suggestion for the commission for our deliberation.
If there are no other questions, thank you very much, and we'll close the public hearing at this point, and we then move into deliberation. Thank you.
I guess just to kind of recall where we're at in this process is we're looking at the information that's been provided, the previous application, and the determination is either we're still in compliance and we can move forward, and we'll revisit it in a year. There may be some ability to delay this decision to a later date, but in terms of changing conditions or recommending denial, we need to probably set a date certain for a type 3 land use application. So those are kind of the three that are probably out there right at the moment. If you have other ideas, we can certainly try and figure out which process that would move down.
What's the framework for delaying decision?
Couldn't we just move to continue?
I think we could move to a date certain. What concerns me is moving so far out,
It's not gonna be for us.
well, until October.
No, I'm not willing to support that.
So there's no 120-day rule on this because we're in a review. Is that true?
I actually would argue that the 120-day rule does apply. And when the 120-day rule started ticking is probably when Laura and the applicants started having discussions about holding this review. My recommendation is, at this point, is consistent with staff's position, which is an applicant who comes with an application doesn't have to have established the use yet. They come and they ask for permission to have a use. And I sort of view this sort of review as sort of a new permission request. And the fact that the applicant has stopped doing this for a month or 3 months is not a long enough time to determine that they have abandoned or otherwise given up. If the applicant, say, had come originally, they have 2 years to actually implement their proposal. So, our recommendation to the staff was they have to come back next year. So, let's revisit this next year, because ultimately, if they are not a school and they are a foster care or residential facility, it's allowed outright anyway. So, this conditional use permit just sort of becomes superfluous. And that's sort of where we are right now. We're in this superfluous conditional use permit land right now. But if there's additional documentation about the nature of the school that you all want to continue for 2 weeks and have the applicant come back and provide some further evidence of authorization to operate a school or the ability to operate a school, that would be within your purview, certainly.
Thank you. That's kind of where I'm leaning at this point, is that I don't think that I could, in good faith, recommend that we continue the application until October, because I don't have enough information to go on to make a determination as to whether they're doing what they were supposed to be doing. I guess what I would like to see is that I'd like to see us continue this till the next meeting and ask the applicant to provide staff with a copy of the letter that she sent to the neighborhood association, because that would sort of make me feel a little more confident about the request. And also, any other documentation that she may have with regard to the neighbors or anything of that sort. And I guess the other thing I would like to somehow get out on the record, Patty or Diane, if you're watching this tonight, please show up here from the Rivercrest neighborhood, somebody from the Rivercrest neighborhood.
So you're asking for the continuance?
Yes, I'd like to strongly recommend that we continue this to the next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the 23rd. I think we have faxes, we have emails. The applicant can get that information to staff in that time, so we have something else.
Right. So I believe that if anybody asks for a continuance, we have to continue the hearings.
I'm just making a motion to that regard.
I'm not sure that Commissioner McGriff sits in the same position as the public when it comes to requesting the continuance. She's just made a motion for the commission's consideration.
Right. I'm not out there today.
Commissioner Maybe.
I'd like to see if Commissioner McGriff would like to accept an amendment to include copies of the letter that you sent to the school district.
Absolutely.
And I guess at the very least, and then I don't know who it would be, to see if we could get a comment from Rivercrest even if it's a no comment.
A little hard to require.
I know, I understand.
That's what I'm saying, we can request it. I'll call it myself after this meeting and say, if I were you, I'd get on down there.
I mean, it's very difficult for staff when we do such extensive public noticing and
No,
to
I
be
understand.
held up because someone refuses to respond.
No, and I'm not, and my amendment would not be to require them to come, but to, you know, have Chris send them an email. I mean, she's got their emails and say,
Hello.
your name came up at the planning commission, you might want to review the tape or something, I don't know. But anyway, the specific,
Yes,
we
I
have
would,
to add the letter.
yes,
from
I would,
the
I
school
would,
district.
accept that.
And I sent them
Very
an
good.
additional email this morning asking for comments on this
Okay.
piece as well.
Through request.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion to continue this meeting until our next meeting, with the addition of having a copy of the letter, from the applicant to the school district.
And to the one that was sent to the neighborhood association with the good neighbor policy, I believe, is that
Two
what
letters.
it
Okay. Is there a second?
Yeah, second it.
We have a motion and a second. Laura, would you take the roll?
I think Tony has it.
Commissioner Kidwell.
Sorry.
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe? Aye. Commissioner Henkin? Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
Chair Finn?
Aye.
Thank you, motion carries. So we will continue that to 5/23, Monday.
Continued until 5:23. Unanimous. Okay, thank you.
Either or E squared.
Excuse me, would you please come up to the microphone and state your name and
But it doesn't have to be their name,
Yeah,
that already.
And I want to check with the council at this time. Are we taking, public questions at this point? I don't,
It's up to you. You
I
can
think it's okay.
you can do that, or you can ask the applicant to speak with staff. Either way.
applicant, please speak to the staff.
Yeah, I'll talk to you when we're done.
Okay. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is, CU 1002 update. The applicant received approval of conditional use permit to operate the farmer's market, and this is a review of that conditional use.
All right. There's nobody new in the room. You don't have to do the
I
legal.
don't believe there's anybody new in the room. Is
Well,
that true?
one person did, but I hope he doesn't want us to read it again.
All right. Clear to move forward? Or?
Are we
Are
clear to
you
move forward?
here to comment about any of these applications? Okay, so we can skip it for this, and we'll do it during the web.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Last May, the applicant, which is Jackie Herman Williams, was approved for a farmer's market in downtown Oregon City. Farmer's market is located on 8th Street between Railroad Avenue and Main Street. It operates on Wednesdays. The hours of operation are from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. This specific farmer's market requires conditional use because of the hours of operation. You'll know that we have other farmer's market around the city that don't require conditional uses. As a condition of approval, the planning commission required a 1-year update on this one. There are no other updates. This is going to be the only update. The farmer's market is located within the street pavement. So they set up booths where the parking is on street, and then through the middle of the market, the vendors and people would walk down the market, and the sidewalks would remain clear as well. This application, since they're actually in the public right of way, the market sets up barriers at 1 p.m., which is 2 hours before market opens, and that allows people to use the time on their meter, which is a 2-hour maximum, and leave space. Excuse me. Since then, there have been a couple changes to the market since it was approved. It was originally approved with a couple of parking spaces. The first was for public and market employees to park in public space on 12th Street in Maine, and also on the end of the Oregon Trail and within the public right of way. Vendors were to be staging within the gravel parking lot at 12th and Main. Since then, there's been some opportunities where some vendors couldn't physically make the walk from 12th and Main to the market, so the market has let them park at Blue Heron And then also, Bush's Furniture has opened up their parking lot after 5 p.m. for the market and the users of the market as well. Those have been the only changes in the conditional use. We've had no major complaints from police or code enforcement. There were 3 cars that were towed, I believe, but it was all on the same day. Other than that, no major issues. Staff recommends the conditional use be able to move forward since there are no major changes with no more updates or anything like that. There's nobody that signed up to comment on this one. The comment was, again, since the neighborhood association, everyone that commented on this conditional use, no comments were received, but the applicant is here to answer questions as well.
Okay. Are there questions for staff at this point? Mr. Maybe.
You know, I can't let it go. It says budget impact 0, so there's been no additional requirement for policing and no loss of revenue to the parking meters that you're aware of.
I don't know the answer to either of those questions. The applicant may.
Well, we do have a comment from code enforcement that they had to do a tow, but that happened.
Minor.
So
Does that have anything to do with the market?
yeah, they had to be towed to clear for the market.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, the city was aware that there was going to be that loss in metering during that time period. When we had started as another condition of approval, they required an agreement between the city as well and to use our space on 12th and Main, and that was completed. So this is the only other condition of approval.
since code enforcement isn't here saying we've lost too much money, don't do it, I guess they don't have a problem with
They
that.
sent an email. They didn't say they
Right.
did.
Okay.
And they've also got all the right-of-way permits and all necessary permits.
Any other questions of staff at this point?
Are you gonna ask us if we have any ex parte contacts?
I will. I will. And Commissioner McCraft,
Oh, well, of course I have ex parte because I come to the market.
as do I.
And I know the manager, but I have not spoken with her about this application.
Nor have I.
I don't even go to the market, they don't sell meat.
Yes,
They do sell
I
I went the earlier stuff, there's all this like
Oh,
vegetable stuff.
I got some
vegetable.
fabulous stuff there, and fish and all kinds of stuff in
Fish,
there.
that's not meat.
Yeah, it is.
Ask a Catholic on Friday, is it meat or not? And you'll get the answer no, so it's not meat.
Well, we're road Catholics here.
Anyway,
Okay.
Nor do I.
I have none.
No. Can we ask the applicant to come up, please?
why?
Because he said so.
Just because.
I'm not giving you fifth carry.
Good evening, I'm Jackie Helmdens, manager of the market.
Good evening.
Hi, Jackie.
And we're happy you're here.
Thank you.
And I would just ask if you have any comments or corrections or updates to make based on staff's report, and whether or not you have any information that would answer Commissioner Maybe's question about the parking meter
In policing. if
and,
there's
and
been-
policing.
Or we had a question about meat.
I can say there's plenty of meat, and there's always been plenty of meat at the market, so beef, pork, goat, and chicken, so, I really don't know what to say. I seem to work pretty well with code enforcement. All the city departments have been incredibly supportive and helpful. The market, myself, have gone out of our way not to tow anyone. I've actually personally run into the courthouse and gone through the metal detection, run up and down the stairs saying, anyone parked on 8th Street, you've got 15 minutes to move your car. And, we've kind of delayed or put off towing quite a few cars by taking steps ourselves to mitigate the circumstance. We just towed 3 all on one day for some reason, and that was it. Yes, we do bag or code enforcement does take out parking downtown for the market, but then there's an enormous amount of people come down to the downtown core all the time, so the parking meters the rest of the time are pretty full.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the commission? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Not a question, but just want to let you know that I think it's great having it downtown. I think it adds a lot of vitality, and I appreciate all your work and your perseverance in meeting all the conditions of the permit and going up over and beyond the call of duty to talk to people about parking. I mean, I think that's great that you ran over to the courthouse and said, hey, please move your car. Just that little extra that makes a lot of difference. And, I hope to see the market there and continue to thrive and grow.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask for any public comments in opposition to the applicant, and seeing none.
How about any public comments in support?
We'll ask for public comments in support. And seeing none, we can move to close the public hearing at this point. And so I'll open the discussion for the commission.
I'll make it simple. Move approval of the continued use of the conditional use permit for.
Second.
A motion and a second. Tony?
Commissioner Kidwell.
Aye.
Commissioner Esty.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin. Commissioner McGurk.
Aye.
Commissioner Navy.
Aye.
Chair Singh.
Aye.
Would you please let the record reflect that it was unanimous on the farmer's market?
I will. Unanimously approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. When are we back? June 1st, all right. Put that on your calendar, Damon. June 1st, all the meat you can eat.
That's not true.
Yep.
The third item on our agenda tonight is SP 1101, Site Plan and Design Review, WR 1101, Natural Resource Overlay District, and BR 1101, Variance. And I'll hand it to, I'm sorry, I'll read the quasi-judicial land use hearing script. The aforementioned public hearing file numbers, are scheduled tonight, and the staff report was prepared for the application and was made available to the public 7 days before the public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the commission will follow set out in state law and Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart to my right. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which the card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply, in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they're not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now we'll open the record for file number SP 1101, WR 1101, VR 1101. A request for site plan and design review, the Natural Resource Overlay District, and a variance. Does any commissioner have any ex-parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare?
Nope.
Commissioner Maybe.
I'm on the Tri-City Service District's Budget Committee. We have yet to meet, but I've been on the previous 2 years. I was also on the committee.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Commissioner Maybe? Does any of the public have questions for Commissioner Maybe? No. Commissioner McGriff has visited the site. Have any other commissioners visited the site? I visited the site, and I'm aware that it hasn't changed in years.
Yeah,
There's a nice road there.
I would concur with that observation.
For the record, do we have any other commissioners that have visited the site? For the record, 2 commissioners have visited the site. Does anyone have any questions for the commissioners that visited the site? Seeing none, we'll move to the staff report. Thank you.
WES, or the Water Environment Services, has submitted this or series of 3 applications in order to install a utility line. The utility line is going to come over the bridge between Oregon City and Gladstone, snake along Washington, and then come to the segment that we're looking at today ends at Agnes Avenue. Also, as a part of this project, we're looking at just a small little segment right here where this emergency 4-inch drain line goes onto private property as well. So our jurisdiction goes to the middle of the river, so we go to the middle of the bridge on this one. As you can see on the bottom of this slide, it's part of a much larger project. Clackamas County owns this, as well as the Kellogg facility, which has been over capacity. So this will alleviate some of that capacity to the Kellogg facility, and eventually leave Oregon City to take on more flow when that facility closes. So with this application, there's a couple different components. Here's what the bridge looks like today. You'll notice on the west side of the bridge, there's already some lines that are existing. You can see on the bottom left-hand corner of your proposal, the applicant has proposed to install new utility lines on the east side of the bridge. So this is us standing in Oregon City looking north. Here's some details on what those lines would look like. The reason why they submitted the variance was because our site plan design review requires that all utilities be placed underground. Since this is on the side of a bridge and not underground, a variance is required. The applicant has taken steps to mitigate that variance and meet those variance criteria. For one, they've kept it somewhat in line with the level of the bridge, so it's not sticking above the bridge deck or below the bridge deck, kind of like the other lines that you saw before previously, which were noticeable. Also, the line itself comes black, and then they're painting all the stickers and all those sort of markings that come on that black line to be black as well, so it all is seamless. All the identifying markers. Once the line comes out, it will go into the ground on the side of the land. This is what the rest of the segment looks like. So if you start in the upper left-hand corner, that's standing on the bridge looking at the first stage, and the upper right-hand corner is the second stage, and so forth. As you'll notice, most of this construction is going to be within the pavement of the right-of-way and underground. There's a small section where it's outside of the paved right-of-way, and that's in this bottom left-hand corner, in that grassy area. Part of that grassy area is within our Natural Resource Overlay District, part of it's not. So there is mitigation with this. There's also another component that's going to be above ground, so it's the second and the last component, and that's going to be a odor control valve. It's going to be, as you can tell from the dimensions, a 2-foot by 4-foot box that is near the intersection of Agnes and Washington Street, and it'll be enclosed, as you can tell on the bottom of that slide, by steel. So we talked about,
Could you show that one more time?
so it's 3.5 feet tall, 2 feet wide, 4 feet long. So
Okay.
most of that on the top slide is underground.
Okay.
It's only that gooseneck
And then
that is coming
And
above.
then the little picture to the left is the one you're talking about, that's the steel?
Yeah, the whole
Okay.
thing. So that, the two below, look at the thing that's above
Mhm.
ground. The one above kind of takes that side view, profile
Okay.
view. We talked about natural resource overlay districts. This project is actually within a couple overlay districts. It's within a floodplain, it's within geologic hazards, and it's within natural resource overlay districts. All of their work is either not in the floodplain or where they are obviously over the river, they're going to be above the floodplain, so that's not applicable. For geologic hazards, there's only one small section in the public right of way, which is exempt in our geologic hazards code. So really the only overlay that we're looking at is the natural resource overlay district. So for this whole project, really all we're looking at is what the pipeline looks like on the bridge, what this little box with the gooseneck looks like, and then the NROD mitigation as well. So to make that corner, they had to go out of that paved public right of way. They're still within public right of way, just the unpaved portion. So they used a section of our code that takes the square footage of public right of way, and using that calculation, it calculates how many trees and shrubs. So they're doing quite a bit of mitigation. The mitigation is going to be very close to the site. If you go along the rail line, you'll see that, along the utility line, that red in the map is the utility line itself. There's a Oregon City facility. Part of it's in the public right of way, part of it's in the park facility, and that's where all the plantings will occur. So we kind of identified a couple criteria, but there's more. It's in the mixed-use downtown zoning designation. All our basic site plan design review criteria apply. The city does not require street improvements, since they're really just digging under pavement, putting the pavement back for the most part. And when they're outside the pavement, they're replacing with seed where it was seed, and then doing mitigation plantings as well. And then as part of the conditional use, obviously we looked at the comprehensive plan to verify compliance with that, which looks at regional needs for utilities. We have a couple conditions of approval. It looks like a lot of writing. They're actually pretty standard, nothing too significant, just making sure the paint doesn't chip and that sort of thing. Here's the map that shows that whole line. Are there any questions I can answer for you?
I've got one question. It has to do with, there's a period of 5 years after the NROD area has been planted that the area is inspected and reported upon?
Yeah, they have to ensure a level of survivability for these plants. We don't want these plants to be planted and then just to die and go away. So they'll have to give us money, and we hold that money. And then in 5 years, when they want the money back, we make sure that I think it's 80% of the plants that survives.
Okay.
There's a condition of approval stating that if they can move slightly the location of some of the plants. So if it ends up being a location where maybe it's near a pathway and people are walking over those plants and they keep dying, rather than replacing that same spot, they can adjust them slightly.
Okay.
So just to follow up, so what's the responsibility of the city to make periodic review? I think 5 years is too long to wait to be checking on. I would think you would be going, once it's planted, then you go look at it and then you check on it periodically over that time period. Is that something that you guys have a tickler file that you guys, oh, by the way, I need to go down Washington Street and go check this out, or?
No, well, when the project's final, we'll make sure that they're all planted to begin with, and then if we notice any problem, we can always talk to them about it, or any code enforcement action as well. But we typically don't have every other month on a Monday we go and check plantings. We use that surety or that money to ensure that the applicant does what they say they'll do and keep those plants alive.
So would you periodically drive by on your way to someplace else and just glance out the window and check on it?
We don't have a structured monitoring process. So like as Laura was saying, we check it at final, and then we hold that surety until unfortunately we just don't have the ability to go out and check it all of those.
What I'm saying is you're going someplace else and
If we saw something that everything was dead, someone would probably, yes, we would address that.
I just.
But we don't go out and make sure that they're at 80%.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it really doesn't behoove us as a city to rely 100% on code compliance to do, you know, some of the work. I mean, periodically, I mean, if I was driving by there after it was planted, believe me, I'd be looking over there, you know, and maybe I'd be the one to call and say, hey, by the way, I saw that, you know, 5 of the trees died or something.
Except that this particular area is not a place that people drive by.
Exactly.
You have to specifically go there.
Yes, you'd have to specifically go there, so maybe I'll be going there.
Laura, can you kind of trace where this is going to be dirt rather than road? Where we're doing this, why they have to do all this mitigation?
Right here.
Okay.
The section where, see, this is the bubble of Enrod.
Mm-hmm.
So where they cross into Enrod, but they're outside the street pavement, that's what gets mitigated. And it's being planted over here, and then up here too. So, or actually up here.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That-
I can see that,
That's
yeah.
the part of
I wasn't sure where
Mhm.
where the end rod was. It was like 7 different lines, but I see it.
Such a small
Light blue.
section.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of overlays. There's a lot of going on that map.
Yeah, so you had to go out there.
They're proposing, and I know this is outside of our thing, but I gotta ask this question. They're proposing putting the crossover on the bridge on the upstream side,
Mm-hmm.
so when trees get carried downstream, they can smash into the sewer line and spew raw sewage into the.
The applicant can tell you a little bit more about it. The city actually preferred it on that side, as opposed to hanging below. I mean, at least went out of the way, but they did all the calculations. They're well out of the floodplain and well out of that space
Yeah,
for debris
except
flow.
that being on the water board, I've seen batter boards on our intakes like 45 feet up, just ripped off by trees coming down because the water's here. That big old tree branch is wherever it is, and so.
They've got a lot of metal to keep it in place, and then also it's a 20-inch line. It's actually inside of a 30-inch casing, so
Okay.
it's not. You're not looking at just.
So it's
the
like
line.
a double hole on a oil tanker.
Okay.
Sorry, maybe
I
So
think,
it's well protected.
that's one of the dilemmas that we ran into with this project is you have the existing utility line on the downstream side, which is obviously where we prefer to put it, but there's only so much weight and whatnot that you can hang on one side, and I'm sure the applicant can discuss that a little bit more. And the other alternative was on the pathway itself, probably giving up about half of that space or another route.
So could you give us a little more detail on the planting plan? I mean, I saw it was in the diagram, and then I got out my magnifying glass and looked at it a little closer because it was a little small.
They're all native. They're all off our native list. We do have in our code a requirement for species diversity, which
Mhm.
they've met as well. I think they have 4 types of trees, or something close to that, and a few different types of shrubs as well. What other kind of questions could I answer? We have a requirement for 2-to-1 mitigation. Obviously, they've exceeded that in the planting area. And then, if you want to see the before, is that bottom corner, just that low grassy area. That's what we're mitigating. So it's not in ideal conditions today.
you ready to
Well, no, I was going to say, considering that, you know, that area used to be sort of marshy and swampy a long time ago before it kind of got filled in, would you want to make I mean, I think they've got some good plants on here, but I'm thinking things that would be, you know, more appropriate for that particular type of ground that, you know, I know there's some swirls and things in there, but As much as I like a flowering dogwood, no.
Well, I think if they're on the list, they're on the
Yeah,
list.
I mean, I know they're on the list, but some
They-
native plants are more appropriate for one type of area as opposed to another type of an area.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we also have, the planting plan has to be signed off by a landscape architect or a biologist or someone, that looks at just those specific issues as well.
Serve the type of the environment that, you
Exactly.
can plant it in. Okay, I'm good with that then.
Other questions from the commissioner?
So just a clarification, you were saying that the pipe itself will also have a casing around it?
Yes, it's a 20-inch pipe inside of a 30-inch bigger pipe.
So the casing will function to protect.
You're being corrected, Laura.
He's gonna tell us when he gets
All the
back here.
engineers behind me.
Yes.
They can answer that in more greater
Yeah.
detail for you.
Okay.
Exhibit 1, what?
That's talking about geologic hazards. There's a couple of different things in that because
Well, but I don't, what's it referred to? I mean,
it's just some additional information just for clarification. The plans you got, there are a lot of information in those plans, and there are some
right, and I
copies.
can't access them, for some reason I can't get the site plan to come up.
I can fix that for you. But there are a lot of options that they didn't proceed with that were on the original plan. So that just cleans everything up. It verifies the size of the pipe, and that it falls within that exemption under geologic hazards. So a portion of the geologic hazards that's on private property is not automatically exempt, like the portion that's in the right of way. So that addresses that small section of that 4-inch drain line, which is on
Okay, it's a
private
4-inch
property,
drain line.
which is right
Okay.
here, this green little line. So this section along Agnes, you'll notice they're constructing it right now, didn't require land use approval. Because the portion in geologic hazards, which is this bubble, is exempt by our code,
Right.
and this
Okay.
portion is
That's-
exempt, so that's just clarifying that.
No, that's fine, it's just, these emails don't refer to the 4-inch drain line, they talk about the 20-inch main line, and there's no way that you can do, you could be exempt under A if it was a 20-inch main line, because you'd be excavating a lot more than 25 cubic yards just for the pipe, irrespective of.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to think that it's only a few inches under the ground, because you can only go down 2 feet under that, but a 4-inch line,
Yeah.
2 feet down, the math works.
So there's two conversations that got intertwined on that
Yeah.
email, so it's, I will point to 15,
Yeah.
it's just that.
Okay, now it all works, so thank you.
I guess this would be a good time too, so we're obviously seeing, we're entering exhibit 1, which is the email from Michael Wallace, dated May 6th. You also have one that we received tonight, well, enter as exhibit 2 from Mr. Edgar. It's an email with an attachment, how thermal loading of the Willamette River is a problem and an opportunity. And that email is dated May 9th, today. And it requests that Stacy has concerns that without completely addressing how Tri-Cities and CCSD plan to handle the added clean gray water coming from the combined wastewater facilities, none of these actions should be approved. The additional capacity being brought in by this line was addressed through the master plan that the facility currently has. And honestly, there's quite a bit of information in this this attachment, and I'll let you kind of handle how you would
Just
like
for the
to
record, I can say I was a party to this email well before I knew about this. He actually sent this out to a lot of people about 2 weeks ago, and I did read it at that time. I feel confident.
I guess my only point is that they have gone through a long-term master plan on the site which addressed capacity of sanitary sewer lines coming into the facility, the upgrades that they're going to be making out throughout the years to accommodate the additional capacity and the technologies that they're putting in place into the site. So that, I guess that'd be about all I have to add on that right now.
Any more questions for staff? Hearing none, we will move to the public testimony and ask the applicant if he has a presentation to make.
Good evening. I'm Dwayne Cleaver, Clackamas County Water Environmental Services Project Manager for this project. And I think that staff did a pretty good job of explaining, what the goals are of these variances and stuff that we're asking for. We do have, I want to make one clarification, the line that does come across the bridge is a 20-inch line. It is not inside of the casing. It's a 20-inch line by itself. The 30-inch line would be considerably larger, but the 20-inch line is the only pipe on the bridge. There's ductile iron, high-pressure pipe, and all the joints are restrained. And so it's probably got similar strength to it as the bridge has as far as the question or concern about a tree coming down there and wiping it off is a very valid one. We also considered because the 100-year floodplain is, I think it's about 5 or 6 feet below the bridge deck, and if it gets up there again like it did in '96, it's possible trees could come down and smack it. But the bridge survived, and I feel confident that the pipe would as well, because it's a heavy ductile iron steel with, like I said, restrained joints. Having it inside a casing may just make it a larger target, but the ductile iron is a very strong product. So, we actually, like I said, we initially had it shown to be on the bridge, and we requested to put it on the side of the bridge instead to keep more area open for pedestrians and such. And we did look at putting it downstream and upstream, and it was actually a mutual decision between Oregon City and West that they wanted to see it on the upstream side, and it was a plus as far as balance as well, like we pointed out. But I guess would it be more fair to say it was mutually agreed that you wanted it on the side of the bridge, and the upstream side was the more feasible side?
More feasible.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. I guess I'm going to refer to this email then, because the Exhibit 1, and it's to Mike Wallace, so but it says, thank you, just to confirm the portion to Oregon City would be a 20-inch line inside of a 30-inch case with no additional lines. The response is, that is correct. So is there any sort of 20-inch line with a 30-inch case that...
Well, initially we had talked about bringing both a 20-inch line and a 30-inch line separately across the bridge. At this point, the 30-inch line is not even in the plans because there is not structural capacity on the bridge to hold both a 20-inch line and a 30-inch line and maintain a full grid open for pedestrian traffic. Only in a certain circumstance that the bridge would be completely packed with people. Then it would, the safety factor isn't comfortable enough. Very initially had both a 20-inch line and a 30-inch line on the bridge, so we've abandoned that plan.
Okay. So I guess, Laura, what were you asking about? That you had this is correct?
Apologize for the confusion.
And the unconfusing answer is that this part, just ignore that part of the email? Okay, I'll just do that then.
Is this a review of a water resources application?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure why we're talking about the structural integrity of the pipe.
It's a minor site plan design review, just because of it's above ground, and then it's the water resource because they're going to be digging in and run.
Okay, and I'm happy to talk about how that interferes with the water resource.
The pipe we talk about in greater detail, such as color, because there's a variance involved, because site plan design review requires that the pipe be underground, so some of the mitigating factors are the color, size, location, things like that.
Yeah, okay, great.
Other questions? Thank you very much. We have a comment form from Richard Vandegraff.
Vandegraff. And I'm a neighbor across. I live at Cross Park, right on the river. Lived there about 23 years. The area has a rich history, which I know, and which I'm sure you guys are aware of too. And this is a project that's going to happen. My exclusive concern is the bridge, because it's the only site that's going to be seen day in and day out by anybody when it's done. It's a wonderful gem resource. There aren't many people, there are a handful of places in this state you could say there's a walking bridge across a river, especially the Clackamas River, which is a gem. I'm here to ask you to do the very best you can, and part of that consideration, which I haven't heard, and I know is part of it, part of my background is about, I don't remember many years ago we started this process, but I went over to Weston meeting and I saw 2 pipes vertically on both sides of the deck going across the bridge. And myself and one neighbor showed up for the meeting. I went, whoa, this can happen. You know, you have a biking public, you know, this is part of a bike pathway. You have property adjacent to the Tri-City Treatment Plant that is being considered for a multiple number of uses. We're trying to look at that as a quality area from everything I've seen. And we need to take into consideration that this is going to be a visual forever. Okay? It's going to be a visual for the public. I mean, right now, where can you walk out and stand on a bridge and have artwork above you and look down on the river on both sides without traffic whizzing by you? It's very unique. And I think, I'm hoping, I guess my concern here is not at all to say I'm not criticizing anything. I'm saying, what I'm really saying is, are we doing the best we can by the public? Because this is going to be a resource for the public as long as that bridge stands. West bought the bridge, rehabilitated the bridge. Gladstone's on one side, Oregon City's on the other. It's a partnership. But I think that we need to really make sure that what we're doing is the best that can be done for the public view of the river. That's my major concern. I was a little bit concerned, and I'm still not, on the south side where the bridge burned and they had to rehab that, and then they essentially shrunk down that area, and put chain link across. So they've taken, I don't know, 3 feet or so of it there. I'm not real sure in my mind why they did that. Maybe that's, and I haven't had a chance to review all this material because the website was down and couldn't get to it. I'm a little concerned about that because I would like that to be fully open for the public if possible. And the other consideration is simply the views, because you know, I've lived there for 23 years. It was kind of a spot nobody knew about, except the kids in the summer, and that's changed since the lifeguards have been down there. That's really cleaned up and been much nicer. I see some real potential in that area. It's really undeveloped in a lot of different ways. I love the way the pathway is run. You go right by the west facility, but you're in the trees. I walk my dogs. I see your mare jogging down there. I mean, it's quality is a consideration that really needs to happen here in terms of the only visual aspect of that project that's going to be there for the public to see every day. And all I'm asking you is to really take that into consideration. They moved a long way from double stack pipes on both sides of the deck. I'm a little curious at the fact that, and it may be because the Oak Grove project didn't go through, but it seemed like they were going to run a lot more pipes over initially. Now they're only going to run 1. My only other comment too is again, the 12-inch pipe is a 12-inch pipe. 20-inch pipe is a much larger pipe. You know, if you're going to balance the view, that means that 20-inch pipe is going to need to be lower than the 12-inch pipe to have the same visual view from the deck of the bridge. Those are the kinds of things. How far the pipe is out from the bridge. You know, can I look down to the water? It's going to obstruct some view, we know that. But what can we do to mitigate that in the best quality way so that the public has a better view of that river? It's unique and it should be protected. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you. We have an opportunity for the applicant to rebut.
So can you come up with a suggestion?
Invisible pipes.
Dwayne Cleaver back again from West. Those were excellent points that were brought up. We feel that, as was pointed out in the staff report as well, that we have taken into consideration trying to place this pipe in the most strategic location that would take all those aesthetic entities into consideration, or questions into consideration, and we did place the pipe more like equal span, you know, with the bridge structure itself, so that it would not be sticking below or sticking above, because someone that's over on the freeway or down at a lower elevation would be noticing it if it's stuck down below the deck, and then you'd also be more exposed to things coming down the river, and having it significantly above the deck would help that, but then the people trying to look over into the water would see that as a visual obstruction to things nearby the bridge, even though you don't see it and you're looking out beyond very far, but you do notice that you're looking straight down towards the water. So that was our thoughts that we used to place the pipe where it is, and we are supporting it as close to the bridge structure as is reasonable as well. We are placing the pipe on, they're called pipe support rollers, to allow for expansion and traction differences between the bridge and the pipe. It does actually move a small amount. What comes to mind is 3/4 of an inch or so, and the temperature differences between cold and hot temperatures of the bridge or that we have in this area. So we have to allow for expansion and traction. So they're set on a series of rollers at each support location, but it is tucked in as close to the bridge as is possible. And we are also, as part of the staff recommendation, they said make sure that it's all painted black to not stand out. When the pipe comes black automatically, ductile iron pipe does with a healthy coating on it, and ductile iron doesn't rust either. So what we do is either try to get them to send the pipe out without the typical markings that come painted onto the pipe in white usually, or we'll paint over the top of that with the same black coloring so it wipes that part of it out and make it so it doesn't stand out and become more natural or neutral, I should say. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, do we have, I'm presuming that Plan D10 is that profile of what that'll look like. Do we have that on the screen? So maybe he could be pointing to stuff that would be helpful, because I mean, I'm not an engineer, so when I looked at this the first time, I was trying to get, yeah. Is that?
Those are sections that were taken. These are just rough sketches that were put together by OBEC, who are the structural engineering people. And if you look at the side of the bridge, from one end or the other, you can see it's not a nice straight line, both vertically or horizontally. And so we're making some transitions to try to tuck it in as close as we can. For example, down there on the lower left, you'll see we actually come across the concrete abutment.
Can you point to that? I know we have a pointer there somewhere.
I can get there, we go. There's a concrete abutment that was placed when the new bridge support was constructed on the south end after the fire, but it has no structural purpose on that end, so we did go ahead and have identified that corner to be cut out so that we can tuck it in closer. But and then in other areas of the bridge, you can see that in some places, where did that go? There it is. You can see here we have precast units on the south end. On the north end, which is over out of your jurisdiction, but in Gladstone, we have timbers that we're supporting it on. So it's a matter of trying to come up with alignment that will keep to the minimum number of fittings, because fittings are bends, and keep it tucked into the bridge as close as we can as we go across. You can see that this is actually that's actually the bridge deck here, and we're trying to place our pipe in a manner that the pipe itself is mid-span of the actual deck. These supports that you see underneath are not continuous. There we go. These are not continuous, they're just spaced at the locations where the bridge structure stringers go across. Probably a dozen points across the span of the bridge. In the middle there is where those also stick out to provide the support for the pipe, and the rest of the time it'll just be the pipe itself that's visible.
Is that the fencing? That's the,
yes.
This is where the public is walking here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just real quick for the audience, what she was referring to is the vertical line you have showing that's the railing where. Yeah, that line that's
this one.
Yeah, and in both, it's the same line I assume in both cases. So, and that's the railing, and the on the side away from the pipe is the public space.
I'd have to check with the engineer. Our engineers here are HDR, and we have two representatives here from HDR. But I believe that is the fence that shows it's sticking out into the open way. Do you have that photograph available that shows the bridge in an actual picture that was taken? What's out there? I believe what you're looking at is this fence right here.
So the pipe is gonna be, where I thought it was gonna be over on the, yeah, that's where I thought it was.
It'll be over the edge.
Yeah.
Over the side of the wedge here. And you can see there is about a 5 foot or so on the south end when it's beyond the actual span of the bridge where that fence goes out. That's why it shows in those cross sections.
How does that pipe enter underground from that location?
And once we get down here to where we have soil again, there we go. Once we get down into this area here, it just dives down immediately in a 45 and goes underground, so we have adequate cover, and we'll have thrust blocks. It'll be totally restrained, but we'll also have thrust blocks that will take up any remaining thrust that we need to resist. And from that point, you won't see it.
And we're on the big picture on the top. We're in the Gladstone side, looking
Oh,
forward. This is our Why is that one section fenced off?
At one point, the plan was to put these 2 pipes on the bridge.
Okay.
And when the end of the bridge was replaced because of the fire, and it was all built out of concrete instead of timbers like it was, and like it still was over on Gladstone, there was allowance made for those 2 pipes. They would have come right across the bridge deck behind this deck. And it actually shows you there was 12 feet, I believe, remaining.
So it's basically you pre-screened the area, but now you're going to be using it.
Right.
So will that area be recovered after the pipe's been installed?
You know what?
Will that area be recovered for pedestrians after the pipe's installed? Doesn't seem to have any.
It's not in the plans at this point. This is probably something that we could consider, but
it just seems like it's a big area you have to kind of go in and clean specifically, and instead of letting people walk.
It's kind of raised, or how would you walk on it?
Will that cyclone fence come down during the installation of that pipe?
I'm sure we'll have to in order to be able to reach out over the edge with the equipment to place the pipe, unless they do it with a crane from the solid ground on the side. That'll be left up to the contractor as to what method he uses to hang the pipe out there. So I can see it being the way.
Sure would have been nice if they'd used coated wire fence. That's the one thing you notice. It's like you really notice the fence a lot.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking if you got rid of it, just had unbox that area, it would minimize the visual impact.
Is that within the scope of the site plan design review that we're looking at?
No, not that fence. It's pre-existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you get a permit to put it up in the first place?
Friend.
Other questions from the commissioners?
I don't think we did a land use application.
No. Thank you very much. Any other public testimony on this land use action? Seeing none, we'll.
Wait.
I'm sorry.
What do engineer gentlemen? Do you have any comment about the suggestion by the
Simpson.
Yes, I wrote his name down. Do you have any comments about his suggestion? Yeah, I know they are.
So,
Do you think it's a good idea? Could it be done?
Can we ask the engineer to come to the speaker's table?
Can you be more specific? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
The person that testified had a suggestion and said he'd like to see the visual impact of the pipe minimized, and he made 2 comments on the record as to what he thought.
which was that it be lowered so that it doesn't impact your view down to the river.
That was one.
But they responded that they didn't want to have it be more impacted by the river if something come down it. And as far as putting it in the, I'm not sure there's.
Commissioner McGriff, do you have a question, for the engineers?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what he thought about that. Mr. Vandergraff. Suggestion.
No, the pipe. Is there a way you can make it less visually impactful, or do you think you've minimized it to the most? You gotta get back to the mic, he's lucky devil.
Anything more that you do, we're always open to suggestions. And anything more that you do to try to screen it makes it bigger. If you were to put some kind of a visual screen in front of it that you make it so you couldn't see it at all when you're standing on the deck, only makes the object larger and what it obscures larger. So by having it around a surface like a pipe naturally is, I think that minimizes just tucking it as close as you can and being mid-span again takes into account all the things you're trying to accomplish with the minimal amount of impact. Is it really open suggestions or something else?
I was just trying to make sure that he got that he feels that he was being heard, and that they said, we tried this, we tried that, and, you know, he had a suggestion, so.
Thank you very much.
And if I could just add, we work very closely with Wes, and we do appreciate, we had several meetings with him, several conversations, including Ms. Crusher, our Public Works Director, even David Frazier, our City Manager, and, you know, every time we would make a move, you know, there were other considerations. So, you know, from staff's point of view, we think we've come up with a very good compromise that tries to address, because that was one of our concerns with aesthetics in being able to utilize the bridge. And then as part of those aesthetics became the views, not only from the bridge, but of the pipe on the bridge. But then the underlying is always, you know, we've got a bridge across the river with, you know, thresholds on floodplain, on a major flooding event, and safety and construction of that pipe. So when we tried to balance all of those factors together, we believe we've come up with a pretty good remedy. And these aren't the first times these questions have come up that you've heard tonight concerning aesthetics and placement on the bridge. We've worked with them in several renditions of this plan to come up with what you see tonight. So I appreciate the question. It's an important one. It's one that the city has had as well as Wes as we've been working through this. So without another idea that considers all of the factors, we think we have considered those in preparation for tonight's hearing.
Thank you, Tony. We have one more public comment.
You need to come up to the mic, though. Gotta hear you.
It may well be that placement of the pipe is maximized in terms of where it is. I know they've mitigated the view, they've mitigated the color of the pipe and that sort of thing. I guess one of the things that really kind of doesn't settle well with me is the fact that when they renovated the bridge, they built this concrete structure to put the pipe across and didn't put the pipe across it. So it's like, can't you give us that piece of the bridge back again? Yeah. From a aesthetic standpoint, it's a no-brainer. It couldn't be that expensive. So, I mean, basically their pre-plans said we're running the pipe on the bridge. They repaired the bridge, did that. Now that they're putting the pipe over here, you're saying, well, we can't reclaim that. It's like, that doesn't seem logical to me. It's certainly not aesthetically pleasing.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. We have an opportunity for rebuttal at this point by the applicant.
If you want.
If you like.
You got a point. You got a point.
It's not the best. So I think he was referring to the fence that you guys were bringing up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the concrete pad and the fence.
That's one of the things that we can consider as we go back and look at what our options are. I know that you have the issues of the balance of the aesthetics and what works best. You also have the economic aspects of conveyance that we're always dealing with too, keeping the ratepayers in mind, and so that is also a balance. You don't sacrifice one because of the other, as you say, just quick and dirty is the way you go, is save every dollar you can, but you also try to minimize the expenditures whenever you can to keep rates down. And I know that we worked with the city in the alignment that we came up with, for example, on Washington Street, this thought that we are going out of the pavement into the Enrod was by request of staff, public works staff, to leave room for a future extension or of another utility that they were concerned about a water line, if I remember correctly. And so we chose to go ahead and go outside of the pavement, which put us into the Enrod, which caused us to have to plant these trees and shrubs, which is okay. And so those are a trade-off there. We're planting a lot of trees and shrubs over there now. It'll make that area look a lot better. And so this is just one more piece. Okay, how about if we extend this money too and do this? We will definitely take a look at it and see if it's feasible to do that, to move the fence over. We obviously had a curb there that's in the way that would have to be ground down or cut down, or be a tripping obstacle, and try to make that blend in against the rest of the surfacing there and so forth. What all that would cost and how feasible, what else there is that I'm not remembering right now until we start looking at it again, I don't know, but we could definitely take a look at that.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, you'd recover 35 feet of spare chain link fencing you could use to repair other locations with. So, and at least two sides. But it'd be nice if you could take a look at that. I mean, it looks awkward, if nothing else. Visually, it looks awkward having a space. If you had pipes coming up and going, it makes sense. But so, thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to close the public hearing and open the application for discussion by the commission. Commissioner McGriff, do you have any questions, or do you want to begin the discussion?
No, I think you could start at the other end tonight.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity, however.
The other end, that's
Go ahead.
Yeah, that end.
I don't have any comments. It seems well thought through.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
I don't have any comments. In terms of the visual location of it, my observation in the diagram that they've given us is that the existing pipe is there now is actually higher than the top of the deck. The proposed pipe is below the top of the deck. And looking at the photograph that they have of the bridge and the pipe, it would appear that this pipe would not interfere with the view of the river any more than the existing pipe does. And it seems as if they keep the pipe as close to the side of the bridge as possible. That addresses the visual concern. And really the only other issue, I share the comment that the gentleman from the public had about trying to reclaim the width of that bridge if possible. And perhaps if during the installation it makes the installation of the pipe easier to remove that pipe, and when they put the fence back up after the pipe's been installed, it could be just installed adjacent to the edge of the bridge. As far as access to that level, it seems that just pouring a concrete ramp to get you up to that level would satisfy the need for pedestrian walkway. And so that's really all the comments I have.
And I pretty much echo Commissioner Kidwell's comments about the best location for that pipe is a 20-inch pipe. There's not really very many places you can place it on the bridge. I think that the location of the fence and the cement curb are kind of unfortunate. They're not serving any kind of a purpose, and they probably, hopefully, could be. I don't know if we could do it as part of this application, probably not, but probably should be removed so that the pedestrians can enjoy the bridge. That's it for me.
I wish you could rebuild the bridge and tuck them up underneath, but you don't have that. I'm not paying those rates. Thank you for the work you've done. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you have been responsive. I did recall now being in a meeting a while back where like half the bridge was boxed in, and it was And then one of the discussions was just put pipes all the way across and build a new deck for the pedestrians to go across. No, I'm not gonna pay those rates either, so thank you.
Commissioner McGriff.
I agree with Commissioner Esty.
So I'm looking for a motion to approve SP 1101, VR 1101, and Resource Overlay District, WR 1101.
I so move.
I so second.
Commissioner,
See,
I'm sorry.
he didn't call for discussion after the motion, he just went directly to the vote.
So
Discussion after the motion.
I would like to see somewhere as an advisory, if that's possible, that what Commissioner Kidwell stated be put into the record, because I think that what he brought up is extremely valid, and we do have something that was constructed to be pipe placed on top of it, and now it's not going to be placed on top of it, so then we have this wasted space. So I guess I would just like to see that.
Does that become a condition of approval? I'm wondering.
I guess I would just like to see, some efforts made, as Mr. Kidwell suggested, that be, I mean, I know Mr. Clear, did I pronounce the name right? Cleaver, that he said we'll try to look at it, but I'd like to see what Commissioner Kidwell said. A little more emphasis, and what maybe Mr. Esty has better language for that.
Well, I just have a question for staff. Can we make a condition of approval? I think that this was placed there by others, and we're making this applicant responsible for removing something. Can we do that as a?
I think you.
I mean, I'd love to, but I don't think we have to. I don't think we
didn't say he had to remove it. I just said what Commissioner Kidwell said is a valid.
Well, and what Commissioner Kidwell said is already on the record. And what you're asking for, I think, is that it become part of the decision, not just the record.
Maybe I can clarify real quick. So a couple options that I'm hearing is we can issue this decision with a finding of fact, and we can take what we've heard tonight concerning requesting that that Wes look at the possibility, potential, we'll use correct wording, to relocate the fence on the cement section along the edge line during reconstruction. Okay, we can put that in the findings, kind of in the Planning Commission discussed this and recommended that they consider, and then we would issue the conditions as we have them. Now the question of can we put it as a condition of approval? You have a variance request before you tonight that deals with the pipe being above ground. As part of that mitigation, you could probably make a finding that you move it over. That's what you need to decide in your deliberations. Is the mitigation that's been proposed for the pipe being above ground sufficient? So that would be the two options that I see right now.
Well, and
I guess,
my take would be, as Commissioner Cook said, is that we recommend and not be a condition, because we don't know, as Mr. Beaver said, what might be why the fence was left up in the first place other than inertia, which happens with a bureaucracy. But the fence is going to come down most likely when the work is being done. So it would seem it may be cheaper to put it only at the house, So I don't want to get into the nitty gritty when we don't have that information as a finding. So a recommendation, and they've been good neighbors, and there's other neighbors watching them who will continue to ask the question, and I know I will.
Because you don't want to make it a finding, is what you said?
No, I want to make a recommendation.
I like the way you worded it.
So we will issue this decision with findings of fact based on this hearing tonight, and we will incorporate as a recommendation the concern raised about the location of the fence.
Yes.
And we won't be bringing that back to you, but we will review the tape and we'll make sure that your recommendation is incorporated appropriately.
Yes. That's great. And I know they're so responsible, they'll take a look at it and get back to you.
Yes.
Because they're good.
Because they're good to us.
So we have a motion and a second. And any further discussion?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Espy.
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin. Aye. Commissioner Kidwell. Aye. Commissioner Maybe.
Aye.
Chair Stone.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kidwell, for bringing that up.
Expect that question in the budget meeting. Why do you need to spend all this money in very early?
Next item on our agenda is from the Community Development Director, the report and 2011 goals update.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you. We'll sit. There was also a thing under my
Right in the way.
Yeah, I think why can't my feet go out there?
So, I placed at the dock everyone's location. 2011-2012 adopted goals and priorities from the City Commission. And so I'm hoping won't take up too much of your time tonight, but that this can be kind of the start of us discussing our goals and priorities for the Planning Commission. And at our next hearing on the 23rd, we have Jackson School conditional use permit, the continuation of House of Hope, and then the water master plan, but we're going to be continuing that. So I think we'll have some time. So you folks will have 2 weeks to kind of review the goals and objectives of the City Commission and start thinking about where we should start hitting our goals for the Planning Commission. And I guess to highlight for planning, in the goals from the City Commission include doing the reactivating the Natural Resource Committee. So we will be reactivating that, and they've identified some objectives of the Natural Resource Committee, which will be addressing the Cove Peninsula along the Clackamas River there, where we did the stabilization project and looking at erosion control measures there, just to see how it's doing, if there's other ideas that we can incorporate into that peninsula to maintain its integrity. And then also reforestation of public lands, so some type of more comprehensive significant tree planting in strategic locations on public property throughout the city. I imagine there'll also be some other projects brought through the Natural Resource Committee. We really want to establish ourselves as a Tree City USA. We've had quite a few issues with street trees and sidewalks. That may be something that we discuss at that level. We'll probably review our street tree list and start at that level to have them do the work. And then another priority for the City Commission was completing the South End concept plan. So as you may recall, going back a little bit here, 2002, 2004, we expanded the urban growth boundary up in Park Place along Beaver Creek Road across from Clackamas Community College and in the South End area. We've completed the concept plan and the implementation zoning for Park Place. We adopted Beaver Creek concept plan. That went up to the Land Use Board of Appeals. It was remanded for being inconsistent with Metro's 2040 growth concept map. Since that remand, we've worked with Metro. We've amended the 2040 growth concept plan. We've amended Metro's map to match the adopted Beaver Creek concept plan. So we're going to be moving forward with readoption of that concept plan. Once that occurs and all appeals have expired, I'm hoping that we'll get that done within the next year. And for the 2012-2013 budget, I would include writing the implementation measures for the Beaver Creek concept plan. So we are currently writing the scope of work for the South End concept plan, and it has been approved through their goals and priorities as well as in the budget. For July 1 of this year, we're going to hope to kick off that process. Imagine we'll have at least one planning commissioner on the Citizen Advisory Committee as part of that concept plan. We'll also be using construction excise tax. Will be a big part of the funding for that project. That's how we're able to afford doing that this year, hiring the consultants and whatnot to do that concept plan. We're also in the process. We received a Transportation and Growth Management grant from the Oregon Department of Transportation to do the Transportation System Plan update. That will be a legislative process coming before this board to hear. I imagine there will also be Planning Commission members sitting on the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee as we move through that process. We have the jug handle project, which we had the kickoff for. Ms. Teraway is serving and assisting there with the assistant project manager for that project as it moves forward over the next 18 months or so.
Spring 2013.
Spring 2013. We've also applied for another transportation and growth management plan for the second phase of the downtown circulation plan. And that would be looking at the side streets that come to Main. As you recall, we did the original circulation plan for downtown. We were making the recommendation to go to a two-way Main Street all the way through downtown. But what we didn't do with that first phase was look at how do the alleys and the side streets to Main Street between there and Railroad primarily function, as well as the alleys next to the bridge abutments. So that would be another, hopefully we'll know June, July if we receive funding for that transportation growth management project. We're currently doing the certified local government inventory of all the historic structures and landmarks. You'll be seeing a presentation on that, the first meeting in June from Christina Robertson Gardner on the status of that and moving forward. And then I also did discuss the Tree City USA nomination process. We did quite a bit of work for that. We were one step short in that we needed a tree committee, and there was some disagreement as to who should be that tree committee. So that's what bogged that process down, but we're looking to get that moving forward again. So that was kind of the update of where we're at. And so I guess, and trying to identify what goals and objectives we want to have as a commission, just trying to put out there that there is additional work that's going to be coming. There's going to be some time commitment from members, or they decide that to be on some of these advisory committees. And I do apologize that I should have done this earlier so that we could have incorporated it into this year's budget. So if there are major endeavors that we want to take, we can maybe do some of the groundwork for it, but I think it may be something that we may have to get into the budget for next year. And I'm just not sure. I look forward to the discussion to see what ideas come forward and what we can accomplish this year and what we can agree. Let's get that budget and let's get it ready, and we'll get it next year. So
we can all keep our lists, and at the next planning commission meeting when we talk about our goals, we can go through our lists.
And I'll forward on the last goals that we did as a commission as another. I'll forward those to you.
When was that?
We may be a year removed, I believe.
Well, that's not too long ago.
Yeah, a year and a half. I think the last time we did it. And then I would also point out this year I did try and get in rewriting the sign code.
Yes.
That fell off the priorities for the commission. Tried to push that one.
Well, that commission.
This year, I tried to get it on
the city commission.
Yeah, the 11 and 12. It's been on our planning committee. We've been talking about it.
You can still keep it on our list.
Exactly. I don't have the fund. I wasn't able to get the funding this year to do that.
Tony, do you have a time frame for these? What you just went through? You indicated that there may be an opportunity for some involvement by members of this commission.
The TSP update, the Transportation System Plan update, I believe that was probably a 10-month or 14-month process. Usually we're looking at a meeting once a month on the technical advisory committee, and then as they go do the technical work, there may be a longer stretch in there where they don't meet. I'm not sure that we have the complete details of the actual schedule until we get the consultant's version, because we wrote a scope with ODOT, and then we ended up awarding it to, do you remember who we awarded the TSP to? Was it DKS? OTEC, but whoever it was. So now they're looking at the scope, and they're kind of going through and kind of saying, okay, we can do this in this time frame, So we're still finalizing that scope. Once we have that, we'll have a schedule in there. But it seems to be that most of these larger projects, for the Beaver Creek concept plan, I believe we had 14 meetings at the advisory committee level. South End concept plan, I think we reduced that number to about 7 or 8. But once again, you're probably looking at a 9-month to a year process without the adoption. Then we get into the legislative land use adoption process with hearings before this commission, work sessions between city commission and planning commission, and then adoption by city commission. We're hoping that with the South End concept plan, if there is any zoning amendments that need to happen to the code, that we would incorporate those this time like we did with Park Place and not separate them like we did with Beaver Creek. And we did that with Beaver Creek. The original intention was to include the zoning code, but because of there were additional meetings added for the advisory committee, and then at that point we were running low on funds, so we decided to get through the concept plan and come back at a later date to do the zoning code, and that is another priority that we would want to get done. On the Beaver Creek adoption process, Beaver Creek.
Go back a little bit.
Sure.
I'm really hoping that the South End process is going to be. I felt it was the other one was very transparent, but I felt it was too. It ended up being X, Y, and Z wanted to do this development, and I don't think that we should be doing a concept plan based on us reacting to somebody's development idea. I think it should be a community process should be very transparent, which I think we did, but I think toward the end it kind of went a little bit sideways, and I'm hoping we've learned there were opportunities and there were constraints, and I'm hoping that we have learned as a community about maybe try to avoid those. Because
I agree, and I think
you and I have had some conversations about that.
And I think one thing is to make sure when we get the facilitator in there to help with that process. I know I was involved with Beaver Creek concept plan. I wasn't nearly as involved with Park Place, but I do know that we tried to create a stakeholder group, and you wanted to have a developer or the property owners. And what I saw for that process was that as it got more contentious and the decisions got more difficult, that a lot of the stakeholders tended to defer to the members who had a development or who owned the property.
Yeah.
And I think that would be one thing to focus with the facilitators to try and draw out more comment. But I did notice it got difficult at the end.
I think,
and that's hard when you have folks who own significant amount of acreage, who have an obvious,
vested interest.
Exactly, and others who are, I'm on the neighborhood association. I can, I can live with it. So I think I hear what your concern is.
I just want to try to elevate it so that it's a community plan and not a, sort of a silo plan. But I was going to ask you about, are there any things that we can do? Maybe, and I generally don't like to do Band-Aids, but I think that there's some real holes in the sign code that if we could do something, even if it's a Band-Aid, that I would really love to see us do that.
I struggle with this one.
And I'd be willing to invest some time into working on some of that, just because talking to staff, I recognize some of the issues that they're having to deal with, and every time I go up and down Molalla, I just think, okay, we got to get the sign code, and then there's other places in town. I just think, what is going on here?
And I guess here's what I struggle with, because my vision of the process was to do it all at once.
Sure.
A very large public involvement, education on signs, get the chamber involved, the business community involved, to hear all those voices, and to do it at once. Get everyone involved, explain A-frames, the sign code, banners. Are we going to have them or are we not? Because we've been kind of providing a Band-Aid historically on that sign code, and it does need to be redone at some point. So my only concern is if we do it in a Band-Aid fashion, we kick it even further down the road as opposed to going in and rewriting it. And then the other component of that, which we're struggling with as the manager of community development, is the enforcement component of it is lacking. We just don't have the manpower, and I don't want to use that as an excuse, but that's just the reality of the situation. So one of my goals is to try and figure out what can we do. Is it to the point that I go out or my staff goes out and dedicate some time? I mean, because really you're looking at some corridors. It's not citywide, So is there a way to address the enforcement component of it? Because that's part of it too. But I didn't want to be out there enforcing something without more of a comprehensive plan on how we're going to address signs in the city.
Well, like, you know, we come out with the comprehensive plan, we give everybody 1 year to comply, and everybody gets warnings, and then on the anniversary, then they become fines. I mean,
I think there's stuff out there right now that isn't even.
no, I understand. I'm just saying that if you do have a complete rewrite, then you can go out and talk to people as an education piece.
I think is very important with signs.
And then people have a tendency to be more accepting to it of,
You got to get
you
the buy-in.
know, we just did this thing and we know your sign isn't compliant, you've got about a year to adjust it.
And while I love the amortization approach, I'll just point out that when we adopted the sign code in '96, we put a 10-year amortization in there. In 2006, there was no desire to enforce it. So,
And that's too bad.
and that's the hard part too, is that we can put it in there and we can put it down the road, but unless we make an effort to actually
I
do
don't
it.
want us to do that again. I mean, personally, I stopped at a business on Malala Avenue and I said to them, look, I know you want to try to get your information out, but why do you have to have it wrapped around a traffic control device? You know, that's unsafe, and it could put a problem for you in the long run. So when I went back up a week later, of course, it was still there, so I'm going to stop again and say, hey, you know.
It's
And the only thing was on his property, but it went into it's now in the public right. I mean, several people have done that, and it's like, why do you want to do that?
Right.
But they do.
And I know this is a heck of a question to be thrown down to the state, but way back when, Nancy and the state had worked out a plan for updating McLaughlin, and we did, you know, basically from the tunnel to the Gladstone Bridge, and we've gotten from like 14th to the Gladstone Bridge. You know, is there any news on I mean, we've gotten a lot of money out of the state, so I know they're probably not really, we don't want to spend any more money in Oregon City, but is there a horizon when phase 2 might be?
I'll get back to you. Because I believe that phase 2 is from the bridge to roughly Dune Drive area.
Yeah, it's basically from the bridge to the overpass.
Yeah, we're staying away from the overpass because it's federal.
Well, I understand, but I'm just saying that's roughly the.
Let me get back to you, see on the butt. I thought there was some money earmarked.
You're in 2025 before you get another dollar out of it.
I made a sort of a crazy proposal to the CIC on Monday night and said that I would like to see the city put into a future budget, or even maybe this year's or renewal budget, that we do a community-based urban renewal plan. And there was a lot of nodding of heads, and that's where it went. And I told the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association I was going to bring it up here as well as something to throw out to say, wouldn't that be interesting to look at? And I know that from my research with the community development director of the city of Beaverton, that they are going to they have their draft plan right now, and I just got another updated copy, and apparently the community will be voting on it. I don't know if it's a vote by mail thing or how they're voting on it, but I've sent him another inquiry about it because it's interesting. It overlaps my personal life and it overlaps my professional work life, so I kind of threw all of them in there together, but I'm going to just throw it out for that possibility. One of the things I've been concerned about over the last 5 years is that Oregon City is a wonderful city and it's my home, but I would like to see us be less reactive and more proactive, and I know that's something that's your desire, and I am very aware after talking to former Commissioner Powell that this is something that you have talked about over and over again till you're almost blue in the face to say, hey, come on folks, this is really important, this is something we need to do. So I just want to let you know, and the other commissioners know, that this is something that I certainly support you on those efforts in terms of getting a better process so that when developer ABC comes to us as a city and says, hey, I want to do this, we can go, that's great, here's our plan. You're in our urban renewal boundary, this is what we'd like you to do. And it's perfectly clear. This is a community-based, it's a transparent plan. Everybody got their say in it. here's what we decided, go at it. So we're not just reacting to things. That's not really a good way to plan. I do appreciate your handing this out to us. I just flipped through it during the last hearing, and I apologize if I didn't look like I was paying attention, but I just went to a session on the last Monday in April with Ed McMahon, who's one of the people that wrote an article in here, and I thought, hot diggity. He was talking about this article that he had, and I advise you all to read that. He is with ULI, and he's a senior resident fellow and knows a lot about development of communities, and he talked a lot about shopping centers and scale, and we only had him for an hour and a half, but wow, that was one amazing hour and a half, and myself and 6 other people got to have like one-on-one with him. So it was really amazing. So this is great.
So does that kind of answer some of your timelines? I think as we move forward and some of these projects actually we get the scopes finalized, we'll have better timelines. But that's usually what we see. We don't want to overburden citizens coming, to a complete, year and a half commitment. So we do try and compress those into 8 months. A work session in there, open houses in there. Try and keep their meetings to about 12 or 14. So with that, this is
really good. Takes a little time.
It does. It certainly does. I would just kind of have that as the beginning of us considering what our goals are for here. And like I said, I don't want to be the broken record, but we got to remember we've got, with Laura kind of working with Public Works and helping out there, and we still there's 3 of us, plus myself. We will get as much I will get as much done as we can.
Yeah, and at least we can put down some priorities and maybe aim at one.
That'd be great.
If we could do that, I think that would be good for this first year.
And I think as we work through it, we may be able to find some that dovetail onto some of the things that we may be doing. We can build on that, or say, hey, it might not be your number 1 goal, but we're doing this here, so maybe we can get this done with it.
The only thing I guess I'd say is if as we kind of move along, if you identify particular target dates that you see as, kind of initiating some of these things, you might just let us know by email when those things are projected to start, so we can kind of plan for it. And I think one thing to just look forward to that summer, various people are taking vacations and things, and so if we get a heads up, maybe we can coordinate some of those meetings a little bit better.
Well, that's something we can, if people know generally about the time they're going to go, that might be something we could talk about and then have just sort of a tentative schedule. I already know in August when I'm going to be gone, so I'm happy to say, here's when I'm going to be not available. But
sure, maybe Tony can kind of coordinate that calendar, knowing when people are going to be available and when some of these things are going to actually go into the active process.
yeah, you could just do a little matrix with our names and then July, August, September, and put down when you're going to be gone. And
make sure you've got a quorum.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing I was thinking about with when you said that, Charles, about, because we're going to need a quorum, so it would be good to know.
I'm going to be gone for a week in July, so, somewhere along, I'm sure all of us are going to miss 1 or 2 sessions over the next few months. It's just a matter of making sure that we have continuity as we're going through this stuff.
And I guess kind of stepping away from the goals priority, we're still, we are seeing some activity in terms of land use applications, but it's still way below average. We did get an annexation request up in Park Place for about a 6.5 acre piece again. So you'll be seeing that. They just turned it in about a week ago, so we're probably a good 60 days out there before we'd have a hearing. Other than that, not a whole lot that's a type 3 or type 4 type of review. Most of it's type 2, very little small developments or additions to existing buildings are predominantly what we're seeing.
Yeah, here's what I'm seeing in terms of the sort of the bigger financial picture is that this is sort of a Cliff Notes version, but any bank that seems to have been involved in having their assets go out there in the ether and having the federal government look at them are not really doing a lot of lending. A bank or two that have not been involved in that are the ones that seem to be able to lend, and you know, they're asking 30, 40%, 45% down by the applicant to even get in the door to talk to them about lending them any money. And we had one project we worked on, got down to the day to sign the papers. Bank called them up at 9 o'clock. They were supposed to meet at 10 o'clock and said, we're not doing the deal. I mean, that is what's happening over and over and over again. And we've got I'm working with a lot of people who are looking at feasibility to do mixed-use projects, and I can tell you that they are not lending on any mixed-use projects. They're barely lending on any affordable housing. I mean, that's about what they're lending on. Other than that, unless people have a lot of cash in hand, which they don't right now, the banks are, and it's funny because I get a call once a week saying, how come you're not sending us any clients? The banks, you know, we have money to lend. I said, well, you're not lending any of it. And then when you go there, the people get run through the, you know, the ringer washer, and they're coming back and telling us they're getting treated poorly. So I said, I don't really want to refer anybody because that's just kind of at cross purposes. So it's just very strange.
What we are seeing is much smaller unit sizes being constructed. Those tend to be selling. Picking up, for example, the Sequoia Crossing out there on Glen Oak, right just south of the high school. The bank currently owns that, and we've got 2 developers working in there, but they're buying up about 4 to 6 lots at a time. If they sell them, they'll go back to the bank and buy a couple more.
But if they don't?
If they don't, they're sitting on those houses, so there's not a whole lot, not overabundance of spec building going on. But like I did say, you are seeing these smaller lots going, 3,500 square foot lot, single family detached homes tend to be selling. The smaller attached units that you see by Two's Pond off of 213 down there selling. But the interesting ramification of that is that our construction excise tax, our school fee, our system development charges are all based on square footage of the building. And with that big reduction that we've seen in square footages, this trickle-down effect just continues to ripple through. Our ability to, our SDC funds, for example, have been significantly impacted with the downsizing in the size of the home. Not only was just the complete slowdown, but what is being built is 400, 600, 800 square foot smaller than what we've historically seen. So
are people still, I mean, I'm hoping that we're not looking at raising fees to compensate for that, because that's the other thing I'm hearing all over the metro area, is that the jurisdictions are getting criticized because they're jacking up the fees, so that sort of discourages any investment if most of their dollars is going out for those soft costs. So I mean, it's just we're kind of between a rock and a hard place is what I'm seeing in terms of, because Bureau of Development Services they're way down, and they just jacked up their fees last year, and there's just screaming bloody murder about it. I mean, Portland has high fees anyway.
So it's good for everybody else to jack up their fees so they look more attractive.
Well, Malala is talking about lowering theirs. Milwaukee's considering taking their fees down to help spur some development and reinvestment. I don't know what Lake Oswego's doing. You guys are doing okay.
We raised ours.
You raised yours? Oh,
Slightly.
Yeah.
But pretty much held them the same. We're already high.
Yeah.
We're already way down. So.
You don't hear much complaining about Lake Oswego, though.
Well, there's not much development going on. Well, lots of redevelopment.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more redevelopment.
Edge development.
We're lending on a lot of redevelopment projects, but not new out of the ground.
Really?
Yeah, with our business finance stuff, we're doing some property redevelopment, but it's stuff that's probably $750,000.
Well, the waterfront, projects gave everybody pause.
Yeah.
There's a lot of empty buildings.
Yeah.
And they're great buildings, but boy, we're kind of crossing our fingers to hope they get filled up so they can continue.
I know. I miss the Rand down there. That was a great spot, but they went to Clackamas Town Center.
This is a really bad spot because it's far out of the way.
I know, I know.
And it's so
Yeah, I mean,
absorbed into every,
I
that
know.
whole commission down there anyway.
It's like, what do you go look at when you're sitting at the Ram in Clackamas, and it's like,
But I think they're gonna open up another restaurant there though.
oh, good.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's a nice little place.
Okay, it's quarter to 10. Is there any more business? I'm just being blunt.
Nothing I wanna say on the record.
I like short meetings.
Yeah, right.
That's all I have, unless you have other questions or anything from me.
No, I would say meetings adjourned.
I move to adjourn.
Don't you agree?